We are in, love stories can be absolutely heartbreaking. And there's no doubt that part of the love story that we're experiencing is a heartbreak. The heartbreak of species extinction. The heartbreak of 300 people a day in Spain losing their homes. 300 people a day thrown out on the street. The heartbreak of people who want to be creative and want to express themselves and want to be of service, not being able to find a job. The heartbreak of climate change and climate injustice. There's so many heartbreaks. So to take that in and not be destroyed by it, but actually to allow it to break your heart open, not to break your heart closed. So we can use that as a transformative force. We can actually welcome it because it wakes us out of our self-centered position, which I think it's easy to fall into, especially in a society that drives that home. Recognize that we're all in the same ship and it's sinking. So it's time to have all hands on deck. And that recognition that we're in this together, there is no separation. When as they say in Bolivia, if anyone in our community is not happy, is not fed, is not sheltered, is not clothed, then none of us are. Recognizing that, then it becomes a great love story, because you just want to engage in the process of healing.
I feel like I'm kind of like floating in and out of these different moments and capturing what I can. But not only that, being able to put them together in a way that then, again, I feel like filmmaking is a kind of an alchemy where you take the visuals, you take music, you take people, the ideas, and you put them together, and I think something new actually emerges. And so I think that what we're to be a filmmaker now and to document the movement is to help bring forth that third thing that we don't quite know what that is yet, but I feel like I'm helping that along. Involved in Occupy when I joined up with Velcrow Ripper, the filmmaker, to start filming what was then called Evolve Love. So it was a film that was the third film of his trilogy, actually. It started with Scared Sacred, and then Fierce Light, and finally Evolve Love, which is trying to ask the question, how can the climate crisis become a love story? And he'd actually been filming for almost 2 years when I approached him actually through email, and I said, can I work with you, because I liked his work and I'm a filmmaker myself. And so he eventually said, sure. So we ended up doing some shoots together and stuff. And we actually got to the point where Evolve Love we felt was we had a lot of material, but we didn't really have the, quote, heart of it. And it wasn't until in September when Occupy erupted in Brooklyn that suddenly we were like, wow, this is it. This is an expression of a lot of the ideas that were being talked about in Evolve Love. And so for me, the Occupy movement, I feel like I was involved before it was even the Occupy movement, because it's the same ripple that's kind of going around the globe and just coming out in different forms. And so after I was actually filming in New York City when Occupy first came to Vancouver on the 15th. And so when I got back, I headed here right away just to kind of check it out, and then just started filming and seeing what I could find. So.
In September 17th, and said, are you going? And I had actually already heard about it, and I said, if I'm in town in New York, I will be there with cameras blazing. And sure enough, I was in New York on September 17th, so I went down to Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street, and that Saturday, and I took the red pill, and nothing's been the same ever since.
Well, yeah, when I was in New York City early on in the Occupy, there was an action by the Yes Men. And Velcrow spoke a bit about it last time, but essentially it was fun to participate in the Yes Men, they're one of my big fan of them too, and they just had this thing where they all got into suits and they did this direct action where they marched down to the Bull, and they proved, though, I think that's what's really interesting is the fact that creativity and lightheartedness aren't mutually exclusive to the severity of the problems. And I think that we need those types of creative, media savvy / solutions to bring a lot of awareness, or to kind of pull a jujitsu on people's anger and flip it around, so then all of a sudden you're like, wow, actually I do agree with you, or wait a second, like I think the absurd in many ways can also reveal kind of the ridiculousness of much of our system, and they're really good at that, and I think we need more of that. And I know that some people feel that, again, severity means you got to be, really focused and mostly angry all the time, and I think that'll burn us out. So I think by having a lot more fun, with always in mind what we need to do, I think those two together will, again, create that sort of third fuel source that will allow us to actually continue doing the work that needs to get done.
So I was filming at Occupy Wall Street since the first day, and it just, it continued to snowball and get more and more, layered and deep and multifaceted. And then other Occupies started to happen. So I think one of the early initial Occupies that happened before October 15th was Occupy Oakland. And right after Scott Olson was hit by a projectile and almost killed, it felt like the Occupy movement took a huge leap into seriousness in a way. The stakes suddenly were raised. And the following week, Occupy Oakland called for a general strike and a huge march to shut down the port. And I came out for that. So I spent about 4 or 5 days staying at Occupy Oakland, and filming there. Occupy Vancouver started then, right? And Occupy Canada lit up. Occupy New Zealand, Occupy Australia, and Occupy UK has got dozens of them all over Europe, Berlin, Paris. So the next one I went to was Occupy London. Just got back from Occupy London, and I'm really impressed with what's going on there. They have 3 camps, one in front of St. Paul's, and check this out, the Archbishop of Canterbury has said that they can stay no matter what, and if the police try to evict them, he will give the occupiers sanctuary inside of St. Paul's Cathedral. This is the Church of England, people. So if that's not a stamp of approval from the stodgiest of the stodgy in a way, right? But he's talking about there was a pamphlet at Occupy Oakland that said, what would Jesus do? What do you think he would do? He'd be throwing the moneylenders out of the temple like he always did. He would be right there trying to create a world that works for all life, a world that works for all humans, a world of justice, and a world where people aren't exploited and the planet isn't exploited for the benefit of the tiny, tiny percentage. And then I went to a few places that weren't occupied in this fall sort of global revolution tour. I went to Spain, where I met with the Indignados of Spain. That was a movement that began May 15th. I followed the Arab Spring. We went to the European summer. So in Spain, it was really the first phase of the European summer, where they occupied their squares and their plazas and built a movement. And the movement 6 months later is still going strong. They're no longer actually staying in the square. They actually made a choice in Madrid to leave voluntarily. They decided it was time to move to the next level of the movement. So they left a big sign behind saying, we have not left. We are occupying your consciousness.
Well, I think since getting involved in Occupy, I've noticed that I feel like I've been fairly aware of all the shadow, you could say, of our economy and environmental destruction, and just the impact on our society of relationships primarily based on transactions. And so I feel like I've tuned into that a fair amount, and I think that the Occupy movement has essentially made that even more present on top of mind for me. And so I just feel like it's always there now, like the sense of seeing the world with those eyes. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think for some people they can find that really overwhelming or say depressing at a certain point to like always see the shadow. But I guess I see that it's important that it's present as you actually do your work. And I think because if you can integrate that and use it as like the fuel for what you're doing without burning yourself out, I think that is actually what can carry us forward. And so those are the biggest changes I think I've seen.
A successful society is a world that works for everyone and a world that works for all life. It's a world of mutually enhancing relationships. That means that my power is built when your power is built. It's that the brighter you shine, the brighter I shine, the brighter the whole world shines. This is not that old model of dog eat dog, that survival of the fittest model. That's actually the model of a juvenile species. Mature species like rainforests and ecosystems like coral reefs or prairie grass ecosystems are complex webs of interdependence, systems upon systems upon systems that weave together and live together and inter-are. And that to me is a successful society. It's simply a natural society. It's living like a natural ecosystem in which we are constantly engaging in mutually enhancing relationships, knowing that if one part of the system is harmonious and healthy, the whole system is. So there's no separation, so we want to have room for the diversity because we know our strength is in diversity. We celebrate that diversity as it is in ecosystems. So for me, a healthy society is an ecological society.